North Carolina's U.S. Senate race promises to be one to watch on election night next November. Republican incumbent Thom Tillis wants another term in the Senate, and Democrats would love to turn that seat blue. But for now, voter attention is on the matchups for the March primary races, and a big development recently on the Republican side of this race. Carolina Journal is covering this race very closely. Rick Henderson is editor-in-chief, and he joins us now. Rick, welcome back.
Thanks, Donna.
So one primary challenger to Thom Tillis has dropped out already.
Right. Garland Tucker, Raleigh businessman, investment advisor, self-funded his campaign largely, put something like $1 million of his own money into this. And Garland Tucker is a historian and, as I say, an investment counselor, and decided to drop out. Basically, the excuse he gave, or the reason he gave, was that he said that at the time, the impeachment proceedings in Washington were sort of sucking all the oxygen out of the political race right now, and that he didn't feel it was worthwhile for him to move forward with his campaign.
I thought it was interesting as well that some of Garland Tucker's messaging had to do with whether or not Senator Thom Tillis was supporting President Trump.
Right.
And it appears now that Senator Tillis has been endorsed by the president at a rally, but also that the senator is talking about voting no on impeachment.
Right. So you've got the situation with Garland Tucker was that he announced that there needed to be a real conservative in the race at the time. He said Thom Tillis was not a real conservative. Tucker also had criticized candidate Trump pretty significantly before the 2016 election, and then suddenly flipped and became the president's biggest supporter. Of course, Thom Tillis himself has had his own history, having an op-ed that was published in the Washington Post saying that the president did not have the authority to, I believe, to do some things with border funding and the like, and then 2 weeks later changing his mind and voting for the bill that allowed that to happen. So there's been a lot of jockeying going around about who's the real supporter of the president going into this race, and Senator Tillis has come forward and said that he's the guy, and the Republicans, I think, have pretty much coalesced around him now.
And we will see, once the dust settles and all the filing is over, if there are any others who jump into the Republican primary race for U.S. Senate. At this point, Rick, we know that there are at least 5 Democrats who would love to be their party's nominee to try to challenge Tillis. Interesting that the polling tends to show that Thom Tillis could be vulnerable, and that's what the Democrats, the national Democrats, are seizing on. So we have 5 people who, at the point that you and I are talking, have officially filed. We've got Trevor Fuller, Steve Swenson, Atul Goel, Erica Smith, and Cal Cunningham. And it's those last 2 people who are getting a lot of publicity. Right.
Cal Cunningham's a former state senator. He has run for other offices before. He has received the support of the National Democratic Campaign Committee, the Senatorial Campaign Committee. And so he has also raised lots of money, done fundraisers and the like. We spoke about him in a recent episode of Carolina Journal Radio, in which he was the person who decided to sit in the windowless basement, make phone calls, and raise money.
Explain that phrase, where that came from the National Democrats.
There was Senator Jeff Jackson, who's a state senator from Mecklenburg County, said he had been courted by the Democratic leadership in Washington. But what Senator Jackson said he wanted to do was he wanted to go around the state and meet voters and explain the platform and why he would be a better senator than Thom Tillis and the like. And he said he was told by the Democrats, no, we want you to sit in a windowless basement and spend all your time making phone calls and chasing down money from donors.
Oh, my goodness.
And so Senator Jackson said, well, I'm not interested in doing that. But apparently Cal Cunningham was a guy who was interested in doing that. And so
he's been endorsed.
He's been endorsed, indeed. Erica Smith has not gotten that endorsement, and she has not taken well to that at all. First of all, she has won more than one race for the state Senate. She is from Northampton County and has been in the Senate for several terms. The interesting thing about this race is that former state Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr said on a recent episode of NC Spin that in some ways Cal Cunningham is the ideal candidate that national Democrats would like to see run in North Carolina for the Senate. He's a veteran. He has won office at the state level before. He has not won a statewide race, but he has been elected. He can raise money. He's very photogenic and the like. But Erica Smith may be the candidate that say that the national Democratic activist groups may be more likely to see. African-American woman, again, state elected official still currently, and someone who is likely to be a very ferocious campaigner as well. And Cal Cunningham remains to be seen how dynamic he would be on the campaign trail. Of course, Tom Tillis is not exactly a fire and brimstone campaigner himself, so there would certainly be a contrast in lots of ways if Erica Smith won the primary, but she's got an uphill battle there.
This sounds like a really interesting primary race to follow on the Democratic side here.
Yeah, it is, because it's going to be fascinating to see if Senator Smith can actually generate enough support for her campaign to be a viable candidate, to actually run ads, to travel around the state, to go to events and things like that. And if Cal Cunningham is actually going to show up at these events, if he's going to try to act as if he doesn't have any competition, that he's basically running against Tom Tillis now. This happens a lot in political campaigns, where someone who is presumed to be a front runner just simply ignores all the other candidates and runs against the likely general election opponent. And so if that's the way the campaign shapes up, it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Now, we said he's received the endorsement from the it's the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee.
Yeah. Right.
Wondering if any national Democrats will come in on his behalf in the primary, if they think that perhaps Senator Erica Smith does have all of that grassroots support that you're talking about.
We will see, I'm sure, presidential contenders come into the state, and when that happens, it will be interesting to see who appears with them.
Exactly. And speaking of the presidential race, also some fascinating dynamics going on with the filing for the presidential primary here in North Carolina. Now, on the Republican side, President Trump is on the ballot. No one else, and apparently there's a reason for that.
The state party would not allow anyone else on the ballot, essentially. So they've just said President Trump's going to be the nominee, so let's not worry our little heads about having any other people to vote for.
Well, curious, but what's really interesting is that our listeners may not realize that it looks like there are 5 different parties where candidates have filed representing 5 different parties in these primaries. Tell us about that.
We've got the Constitution Party, which has 2 candidates. We've got the Green Party, which has, Green Party has 1 candidate. We've got the Libertarian Party, which has 16 candidates. And then there are 15 Democrats on the ballot. More than likely, it's hard to say about the Libertarians, but more than likely of these 15 Democrats, by the time people actually start by primary day, now people will start voting by absentee ballot fairly soon, but by primary day, it would be very odd if there were more than, say, 5 or 6 who were viable candidates at that point. But right now we got 15.
Wow. And the whole issue of 16 libertarians, and they are from across the country.
Right.
Libertarians are notorious for saying, look, I am not associated with the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, or anybody else. I'm a free thinker. Is that what we're likely to hear from some of those candidates?
From the ones we hear from at all, there are going to be a couple of names that one name that people might know is John McAfee of McAfee Systems, the computer software person who's a bit of a gonzo candidate who will probably be very active, and also Jacob Hornberger for people in libertarian circles. He's been an activist for a long, long time, and so those are the 2 probably biggest names among that crowd. But we'll just see what happens if we have appearances in the state of those candidates as well.
It's going to be a fascinating primary that's scheduled for March of 2020. We've been talking with Rick Henderson. He's editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Carolina Journal covering all of these races very closely. You can find that at carolinajournal.com. Rick, thank you.
Thank you.